Good afternoon and good morning if you're on the West Coast or wherever you are around the world. My name is Becky Robinson and I'm with Cheryl Bachelder, and we're so excited to have you join us for today's event. Cheryl, how are you?
Good. How are you today, Becky?
I'm doing well, thanks. This is going to be such a tremendous hour, and we're so grateful to all of you who are calling in. As we're waiting for a few more people to join the call, I want to just cover a couple of housekeeping items before I introduce our guest. On the GoToWebinar panel, you'll see that there's a question panel. I'm going to be interviewing Cheryl today, and at the end of the hour we're going to open up to your questions. And so if you can take a moment to become acquainted with the question panel, and we have a fun question for you. Since Cheryl is the CEO of Popeyes, and since it's lunchtime for some of us, we're really curious if you are a Popeyes fan, what your favorite menu item is, or you can take a moment in the question panel to tell us where you're calling in from. We'd love to just have you get comfortable with the technology before we begin. And a lot of people, Cheryl, some friends of yours are already putting their greetings in the question panel, so I'll share those with you later. And so we'd love to hear from you. So just so you know, Cheryl's in her office, aren't you, Cheryl, at the Restaurant Support Center of Popeyes. And I'm in my home office as well. We have folks calling in from France, from Texas, from Iowa, from Alberta, Michigan, Virginia, Knoxville, Tennessee, Tallahassee, Florida. And our friend in Tallahassee says her order is 2 pieces of spicy white meat and dirty rice. That's the first Popeyes fan. Oh, people are singing the praises of the biscuits being the best on the planet. We have a caller from Bogota, Colombia. Lots in Canada. Our friend from Texas loves the shrimp. That's a lot of fun. It looks like everybody's pretty comfortable with the question panel, so we look forward to your questions later on. Oh, we have a fan of the naked strips and the veggies. We have some folks in Beckley, West Virginia who say they need a Popeyes down there, Cheryl.
We'll get right on that.
All right. It's good to hear. Okay. So I'm excited to dive in. We have a great hour of content planned. So I want to take just a moment to introduce our guest, Cheryl Bachelder. Cheryl has served as the CEO of Popeyes since 2007. And she engineered a turnaround at Popeyes, and she credits the principles of servant leadership with guiding the path. As some of you might know, Cheryl has written a new book called Dare to Serve, and it provides a roadmap for serving, leading, and driving results. We're here today to talk in depth about this approach, so I want you all to join me today in welcoming Cheryl to this event. So Cheryl, let's get just started right away because we want to make sure we have time to cover all the amazing content in your book and in your story. As the CEO of Popeyes Louisiana Kitchen, you oversee more than 2,300 restaurants in 26 countries around the world with approximately 60,000 employees. That's immense. And when you came on board, the company was struggling, but you took an unusual approach to turn things around. Service. So Cheryl, I'm wondering why you chose a servant leadership approach.
Well, you know, I think the reason, as we were trying to think about what was important in the turnaround, all of us came to leadership with our experiences in mind, right? And our leadership team felt like we had worked at a lot of companies. We called them toxic companies, companies where the environment for work was not ideal. And so this became one of my favorite quotes, that there's nothing fundamentally wrong in our country except all the leaders are operating on the wrong assumptions. And that's exactly what we started talking about. We had an off-site meeting. There are 8 people on my leadership team. And we started saying to ourselves, what kind of leaders do we want to be? And we were going to list on the whiteboard all the good traits of leaders that we admired, but what happened instead is we started listing all the traits of leaders that we found hard to work for. And it started saying things like self-absorbed or condescending or didn't care about the people. And it started to generate a theme which was, you know, we want to be leaders that are different from them. We called them them. And what would be different? You know, what do we have to do to be different to create a more effective working environment? And literally, it was right about the time that iPhones were getting really popular. So our trendy marketing guy had an iPhone. He was the only one in the room with an iPhone. And he said, I think there's something called servant leadership. I think I remember reading about it somewhere. And he grabs his phone and starts looking it up and says, yeah, yeah, yeah. And he starts telling us that Max Dupree had written about it and Robert Greenleaf had written about it. And wouldn't it be cool if we could be servant leaders? So essentially the problem we identified, we have now called, now given it a name, and we call it the spotlight problem with leadership. And in my book, I actually open with this idea that leadership is a lot like being on a Broadway stage. When we go to a Broadway show, the spotlight hits the stage, and we wait for the main actor to come out and join us because we know that will be the beginning of the story. Leadership is much the same. When you get promoted to a leadership job, the people all wait to see who you are, how you're going to act, how you're going to lead, and they form their conclusions from there. So we said too many leaders hunger for the spotlight, too many leaders want to stay in the spotlight, and too many leaders forget to shine the spotlight on others. So we brought this idea of servant leadership together with the thought of what if we really turned our leadership spotlight to the people we serve instead of keeping it for ourselves, and what would that look like? Now, servant leadership was not, we were not the people who thought it up. As I said, there are many people before us that came up with this terminology. But the reputation for servant leadership, much as you see in the slide, is, you know, kind of the helping hand, the caring soul, the heart of leadership towards others. And it is all of that. But we believed that it also was a path to superior performance. So we wanted to take everything we could learn about servant leadership and bring it together to create an environment that we thought could generate superior results. Now, looking back, it turns out that we were actually, I think, inventing something kind of new because we have now called it Dare to Serve leadership. It's both the daring aspect of creating a bold destination for your company or your organization married to this decision to humbly serve others along the journey. And it is the combination of bravery and humility that we believe has led to our superior performance in our industry.
Thanks so much, Cheryl. So talking about that, the words humble and courageous don't come to mind when we think of a typical CEO. So why do you think that those are such important concepts for leaders, Cheryl?
Well, actually, while I was writing the book, I came across this interesting piece of research. It's from two academics. I believe they're in Australia. They're a long way away. But they started studying the traits that are in people who compete in extreme sports. And it really provoked this thought into me that maybe leadership is an extreme sport. And what this research determined, that the people who participate in things like base jumping, waterfall kayaking, extreme mountaineering, these people are changed or transformed on two attributes. One is courage, and the other is humility. And I thought to myself, well, interestingly enough, courage makes sense to me, right? If you're going to jump off of cliffs, you're going to grow in courage. You'd have to be courageous to do that. But they said humility was the other virtue that was transformed because these athletes came to understand that so much of their bravery was to an uncertain outcome, and they became humble to the fact that they don't control all the events in this world. And in fact, that's true of leaders, right? We have to create daring destinations, something that inspires our teams to perform, but is probably far past what they believe they can do. And then we have to come alongside and humbly serve them, helping them develop the skills and talents to fully deliver the performance results. And so I came to explain it this way, that daring and serving create the unique conditions for people to give us their best, their very best, and that's what creates superior results.
That's amazing. And I love that analogy of the extreme sports. I think that's a really helpful paradigm. So, contrary to that, the power and position style of leaders has been the paradigm traditionally. So what impact, Cheryl, do you think that that has on American businesses and workers?
Well, I think we've almost forgotten how we think of leadership. So I like to remind people that first and foremost in our culture, we think of leadership as power and position. And I picked this next picture to kind of get all of us in the same page. Now, I don't know this man. His name is not Donald Trump, and I've never worked for him, so I don't know what kind of leader he is. But I know what he stands for in our culture. In our culture, he stands for power. He stands for having a very high position of authority over others. And I'm pretty sure, based on his TV show, that he likes being in the spotlight. Certainly when you see pictures of this man, it's usually next to his entourage or his jet. Suggesting that he thrives in power and position. And so I always talk to high school students about Donald Trump, and I say, okay, he's like a popular leader that we all look at, and I say, what's he famous for? And they have to think for a couple minutes, and then they realize the two words he's famous for are, "You're fired." And then I always ask them, do you want to work for him? And they have to reconsider how they think about him. And I think this is true culturally of our leaders. We think of them as powerful people of position, high achievers. We think they're winning. But then we have to stop and think, are the leaders that work for them winning? And that's where it comes apart. Leaders that lean into power, position, and self-ambition create what I call unsafe work environments. And in fact, people describe the work environment as literally terrifying, fearful, a place full of trepidation. They would never tell their supervisor their best ideas. They would never give that environment their best because they're holding back. They're holding back because the place is not a safe place. It's not a place that's concerned about their development, their growth, and their contributions. So I always say it's pretty much like the cowardly lion in The Wizard of Oz, that a power leader creates a scary environment for work and therefore not a place where we can get people's best work. It also has another negative effect. It creates chaos. Fearful environments create lots of activity, and most of the activity does not focus on results. I like this picture of the dog chasing his tail because I think a lot of work environments feel like this, just crazy busy activity, but not activity that yields results. And again, people are hiding under their desk, fearful of the axe, and they find ways to keep busy rather than contributing their best. So these are the pictures, I think, of our current culture of leadership. One, power and position. Two, fear. And the third, an environment of busy activity that does not necessarily yield top performance results.
Wow, well, those are very helpful visuals, Cheryl, that I think that we're all going to remember after this call. And I'd like to shift now to talk a little bit about the work that you've done at Popeyes. So you've said that Popeyes is in the midst of a grand experiment. Can you tell us a bit more about how the experiment came about?
Well, yes. In 2007, when I joined Popeyes, we had a lot of challenges. Our sales had been negative. You can skip past that slide. Our sales had been negative for 7 years. Our guest traffic had been declining. Our restaurant profitability was fragile because our sales were down. Our guest experience was worst in our category. Really, we were famous for good food, but that was about it. Our restaurants were tired. They needed a remodel. And we were opening new restaurants, but they were not making good money for their owners. You could put that list on a whiteboard, and just about everything was broken. And so we concluded that that was as good a time as any for a grand experiment in leadership. It was kind of like what else could go wrong. And I think it probably allowed us to be more daring than we would have been had we come into a business situation that was more static. We decided that we had to be bold or go home because to be anything short of bold was not going to serve this organization well. that led us to declare with our franchisees. We went to our annual franchise meeting. It was my first day with the company. And we declared the daring destination for this brand. And we put these words up on the slide in front of 1,000 people in the audience. And we said, you know what? We are going to be the hottest concept in quick service restaurants, the hottest concept, the very best among our competitors. And on that particular day, we were down in the bottom tier of our competitors. So going before the franchise body and saying this, I'm sure more than a few people thought we had just plain lost our minds. It was either bold or it was completely harebrained. I just asked some franchisees last week which they thought it was, and I would tell you most of them thought we were nuts on this first day. It didn't seem plausible, right? With all the numbers going the wrong way, it didn't seem plausible. But they told me this, and I think it's a really important lesson. The very fact that we had this bold, daring destination in mind started building their confidence. It started giving them the sense, well, at least these guys want to go somewhere good. We don't know if they can lead us there or not. We're not sure. We don't trust them yet. But at least they have a vision for where we need to go as an organization. And so I think it's a reminder as a leader that the people desperately want you to give them a vision for where you're headed, even if it's not entirely understood at the outset. When I met one of our franchisees at this very first meeting, he said these words. He said, Cheryl, we are like foster children. You are the 4th or 5th CEO we've seen in 7 years. There is no good reason for us to trust you as just our next set of foster parents. And he said, so don't expect us to trust you right out of the box, but do make that your goal to build trust with us over time. So I think vision setting was the first step in building trust with our franchisees. Of course, we had to deliver on that vision for it to become trustworthy, but it was the first step on that first day.
Yeah, that's tremendous. So you had the bold vision, and you had a lot of people to convince that it was a road or a path worth taking. How did you get from this place where most of the people when you came in thought you were crazy, there had been a lot of turnover in leadership before you came in. So how did you get from that place to where you are today?
Well, the first I would tell you is we had to have a lot of courage to step forward with this vision. As I say, the road to bold thinking is paved with naysayers. There weren't a lot of people, as I said, that really believed this could happen. And so I remind you as a leader that when you call out your vision, you have to have a lot of confidence in it. You have to believe it's plausible. One of the things we did is we tested our bold vision and said, is there anybody in our category who has delivered these volumes that we're setting as our goal? We wanted to get to 1.2 million average unit volumes. We wanted to get to 22% restaurant profit. And while they were bold goals, there were other people that had hit those goals. They were plausible goals. And so I encourage my leaders to set very bold goals, but also to have a business case that shows that they're plausible to the people that they're asking to follow. But certainly don't expect everyone to jump on board right away. In our case, the first step for figuring out what to do is we held an offsite with our senior executives. Now we're talking about a room with maybe 50 of our senior people in it, directors and VPs, et cetera, and started talking to them about what we should focus on to grow this company to reach this bold goal. And I love this meeting because this is where, the truth comes out, when the people feel safe to tell you what's really wrong. And we covered that hotel conference room with Post-it paper that said, sales are declining, guest traffic's declining, profitability's bad, restaurants are old, all these things that were wrong with Popeyes. And after we had all of them up on the board, I asked the team, I said, so are these the right problems for us to focus on? And one of our employees, Sandra, raised her hand, and she said, well, Ms. Bachelder, she said, we have this meeting every year, and we always put these same problems on the wall. And I was really speechless when she said that. I remember just going, wow, what do I do with that? And so I thought about it a couple minutes and kind of let it hang in the balance. And I said, well, Sandra, would you like to be on the team that actually fixes these problems that are stuck to the wall? And she looked right back and she said, oh, yes, I would. That would be so cool. It reminds me to this day that we owe it to our teams to focus their work, because going year after year with the same problem stuck to the wall is really demoralizing. It's discouraging. On that very day, we narrowed our focus from 128 projects to 11. We eventually narrowed it to 7, and I often say we did 3 or 4 things really well. You know, we always bite off more than we can chew as leaders. And that decision to move from 128 projects to 11 and then really execute 3 or 4 of them well, to me that was a real service to the organization.
That's very helpful. Can you tell me a little bit about this slide and how this relates to the plan that you put into place, Cheryl?
Well, the first thing that we had to convince our team was this fact that while they were very busy and we knew everyone was working hard, we wanted to demonstrate that we respected our team, but we very clearly had to establish this rule that activity does not equal results, and we wanted to be a company that achieved results. It was a real mindset shift when we landed on those 11 strategic initiatives that we were going to pursue. Everybody kind of panicked in the organization because if they weren't working on one of those 11 things, they worried that maybe their job would be in jeopardy or maybe they couldn't contribute. We ended up finding a place for everybody to contribute their best, but it was this mindset that, no, don't just walk around saying you're busy. Get yourself on the team of the people doing the top 11 strategic projects in this company, and let's fix the things that are broken for real this time and deliver performance results. This was a critical mindset shift, was to focus and to get things focused on activity that would yield results, not just activity.
Yeah, that's a really helpful insight. So can you tell a little bit more about the focus on the vital few?
Well, I think all of us have ambitions to do a lot of good work. And the leader's responsibility is to narrow the focus of the company's ambition to the vital few things that need to be fixed. You know, I'll give a specific example. In our company, speed of service was one of our weaknesses in 2007, but we weren't focused on it. Our restaurants didn't even have the equipment to run a good drive-through. A good drive-through requires this headset thing that's on my head, and it also requires timers so you can keep track of your service to your guests at the drive-through. We didn't have either piece of equipment in our restaurants. We hadn't trained our people. We hadn't made the measure of speed of service one of our important measures of success. And so again, the leader's responsibility is to hone in on the few really broken things, the hard things that need to be fixed, and then really execute against them in a focused way. If the organization is running around with busyness and activity, the leader has to look in the mirror and say, you know what, I'm causing that problem. I can tell you just last year, I lost some focus. The leader often has a flaw, and last year I lost some focus, and the organization started getting that chaotic feeling, and I went, uh-oh, I better get this back, because if the leader doesn't have focus, the organization starts becoming that dog chasing its tail. And I admitted to my employees in January that I was part of the problem last year, and last year felt out of sync because we were trying to do too much. And we once again really narrowed the focus to the vital few things for 2015 so that that chaotic environment would retreat and our people would feel again like they were focusing on the things that mattered most.
Wow, that must have been a hard admission, Cheryl. That's tremendous.
You know, I think I've learned that lesson from a woman named Colleen Barrett at Southwest Airlines. She was the most recent president of Southwest and only the second leader of the organization after the founder. And she said, you know, the organization, Cheryl, really likes to know that you make mistakes and that you're vulnerable. I think leaders are very reluctant to publicly say that they make mistakes and certainly don't like saying, I'm vulnerable. But the organization likes to hear that because it makes you human. and then the organization can say, gosh, you know, she's not perfect. Maybe I'll survive a mistake or two as well, because none of us are perfect. None of us are perfect.
Yeah, that's really helpful to hear, though. I mean, especially from you. And I'm sure that those who are listening are inspired by that as well. Um, so, Cheryl, the first step in your journey was to declare this daring destination. And then what else was required to turn Popeyes around?
Well, I believe the next slide is our roadmap. And our roadmap to results was the document. You know, some people would call this a strategic plan. I just don't really like those words. So we called these the 4 pillars of our plan that would yield results. And so I always want to remind people when I talk about leadership, your plan for results is a very important part of your leadership. And I want you to know at Popeyes we had a very specific plan that governed our activities. When I talked about those 11 initiatives we decided to focus on, they were all under these 4 pillars. One was building our brand so that we'd invite guests back into our restaurant for our great food. The second was we were going to run better restaurants because that's how you delight a guest. You give them a clean restaurant, hot food, on-time service, the critical parts of the service experience. The third pillar was we had to make money. Our franchise owners invested in this business for the purpose of making a return on their investment. So we needed our restaurants to be profitable, and we needed to measure that, which was something we had not done in the past. And then finally, if our brand was strong, our restaurants were running well, and the restaurants were making money, then our franchisees would, by definition, want to build more of them. And that's what accelerate quality restaurants means. It means build great restaurants on great pieces of real estate that generate positive return on investment for the franchisees. This roadmap stayed the same and stayed in place for 7 straight years at Popeyes. So have a vision, make it concrete in your roadmap, and don't change it all the time. People start to perform best when your strategies stay put, and they can start to count on them and get better year after year after year.
That's very helpful. So you said you kept these in place for 7 years, so that means that there must have been a shift at some point.
Well, just recently we announced our 5th pillar publicly in February. The 5th pillar is now the first pillar, and it's called Inspire Servant Leaders. We have made the development of our people and the support of our leaders our #1 pillar for future growth. This company has always been famous for its food, and that's why you all so quickly told me what food you love at Popeyes this morning. But we want our employee experience and our guest experience to be as famous as our food, and that's going to require investment and change, and that is our most important go-forward new pillar that will change the next 7 years of our company's results.
Wow, that is exceedingly inspiring. Can we talk a bit more about this choice to serve and how you've implemented it throughout the company?
Well, the first thing we did, as I said, was this daring destination. The second thing we did to turn around this company was to decide who we would serve. And I'm sure all of you have thought about this at some level in your organization. We serve many, many different constituents. The day we started talking about this off-site, we started putting all these names up on the board that we serve. We serve our guests, we serve our crew in the restaurants, we serve our employees, we serve our banks, we serve shareholders, we're a public company. And literally one of the people on my team raised their hand and said, don't we have to serve all those people? And I suppose the answer to that is yes, but I think something we did that was game-changing is we chose one of these groups of people to be our first priority as to who we would serve. We thought about the guest. Most companies would have chosen their guest because that's the end consumer who brings us their dollars and buys the food. And yes, they are important. But in our business model, our direct relationship is not with the guests. It's not with our 60,000 employees. We do have 60,000 employees, but they work for franchise owners, our entrepreneurs who invested in Popeyes. The shareholders are certainly important, but working for them and not working for our business model would have been an upside-down approach. So after really thinking through all the choices that we had, all the people that we needed to serve, we looked closely at our franchise owners and said, you know, these are the people that took out a loan or mortgaged their houses to invest in building our buildings, hiring and training our people. They really are the heart and soul of the Popeyes business model. If they are not well served, there is no way these other constituents can be well served. You would think that was kind of obvious in our business, that you have to take good care of your franchisees, but to be honest, the more typical relationship in our industry is one of strife, conflict between the franchisor, the corporate body, and the franchisee, the business owner. I've never really understood why there was strife between these two entities, because if there's strife internally, there's no chance you can compete well externally with your true competitors. So we decided we wanted to be an organization that had really top-notch relationships with our franchisees. And to do that, we would have to measure our success by their success. So this decision to choose to serve our franchisees was just as important as our business vision. There was this issue, though, and if you've ever been in franchising, you know, franchisees are sometimes hard to love. And I told them this last week at our conference. You know, sometimes they complain, and sometimes they want special treatment. And, you know, you can start to say, gosh, these franchisees, they're kind of cumbersome. They slow us down. They always are bringing up problems. Maybe I don't like them that much. Well, at Popeyes in 2007, I would tell you we had this problem. We didn't love our franchisees. We didn't even like them very much. And that's an attitude problem. If they are, in fact, your most important customer to serve, you not only have to like them, you have to love them. I know we don't usually use the word love in business, but I like to be provocative. And I think when you love people, you think about them differently. You have genuine concern about what they have to say. You're willing to listen to what they have to say, not just talk on top of them. When they show you your numbers, you're going to take them seriously as if they have a real problem. If you love them, you're going to be genuinely concerned about them, just like you would be a family member in your own family. And I believe when we chose to serve our franchisees, our attitude change to loving them was a very important part of our mindset shift.
I just love that, Cheryl, and I'm not afraid to use the word love either. That's one of my favorite ones. But there are some people who obviously will say that loving the people is all well and good, but that you really have to attend to the bottom line. And one of the frequent criticisms that you hear about servant leadership is that servant leadership doesn't deliver results. So what would you say about that?
Well, I think it's an accurate statement that, in fact, most people think servant leaders are softies. I call it kumbaya and campfires, that we're just about group hugs and not about accountability, not about performance, not about results. The problem with that kind of thinking, and I think sometimes we encourage it, if you want to be a servant leader, you have got to be talking about performance as well as serving others to be credible. It is simply, otherwise we're just talking about charitable organizations, right? And business is not charity. If servant leadership only works for Mother Teresa and Martin Luther King and other larger-than-life historical figures, then it's not going to be treated with credibility in the business world. At Popeyes, the first way we stated it was to incorporate results. We have a purpose statement at Popeyes, and it says to inspire servant leaders to achieve superior results. So we said from the very beginning, servant leadership is serving others above self, and it's always connected to achieving superior performance, never separate, never separate. That was an important declaration in teaching servant leadership in two ways. Our high-achieving people needed to know we weren't going to quit delivering results, and our servant leaders needed to understand that they would be accountable for performance. So achievers would be accountable for serving, and serving people would be accountable for achieving. And it was that marriage that kind of goes back to that daring and serving, that tension, right? There's a tension between achieving and serving. It was very important to establish that right up front with our people.
That's very helpful. So what are some implications for all the leaders who are listening today and who will read your book?
Gosh, it's so hard to just put it in a sentence. My favorite thing is to talk to developing leaders and to hear their challenges and their problems and to help them with good counsel. So let me just say it this way. I really believe that the approach that we took to turning around Popeyes will work in your team and in your organization, no matter how large or how small your circumstance, because it's three simple principles. The first is that bold, daring destination. The second is getting that mindset of choosing to serve others well. And then the third leg of that is to perform, is to deliver results. There are no great leaders without great results. And I believe if you reframe your leadership to address those three same points, that you can experience both servant leadership and superior performance in your organization. But I would tell you this, you will have to be braver than other leaders. Most leaders are fearful of calling out a brave destination for their organization. They come up with a small plan or an evolutionary plan because they're afraid to really stick their neck out. And I want to encourage every one of you to be brave and courageous in setting direction for your organization. And then I want to remind you how hard it is to be humble on a daily basis. As soon as you say, I am a humble person, I always say you just messed up, because humility is nothing that we ever achieve perfectly. It's a day-by-day, hour-by-hour thing. Humility is just having the guts to look in the mirror every day and hold yourself as accountable as you hold others. So humility on a day-by-day, hour-by-hour basis. And then finally measuring and making sure that results are one of the ways you serve your team. If your organization is not performing well, as the leader, you first and foremost have to figure out why and how you help your team get to high performance results. I can't imagine serving people well and having poor performance results, right? If your organization doesn't perform, you can't keep all the team together, you can't invest in their training and development, you can't offer promotion opportunities to people. There's no way to serve well and not perform well. So those three steps I would encourage each of you to apply in your own organization. In fact, the second part of the book is a very personal part of the story, which is, if I want to be a Dare to Serve leader, where do I start? What do I do? And I encourage you, if this is a path you want to follow, to go to that second half of the book and take those ideas into account for your own organization.
Sure. Well, Cheryl, I'm betting that some of the people on this call might be curious about the results that you've achieved at Popeyes, and we haven't yet talked about those. I know the book does share some of those results. Is that anything you'd like to share with us today?
Well, it doesn't sound very humble, but I'd love to share them with you. At Popeyes, the only reason we have the credibility to tell our story of servant leadership is because we have the results attached to it. Our sales of our average restaurants are now up 30% over where we started. In the book, I say 25%, but it just keeps getting better.
That's
our
amazing.
sales are up 30%. Our restaurant operating profit is up 40%, and our market share in the U.S. of chicken quick service restaurants is up 50%. So amazing performance results for the entity. Our business is performing better than most of our competitors. We've opened about 450 new restaurants in the last few years, all of them performing really well. So it has been a very exciting time at Popeyes. Now, the one measure we don't focus on, but I often share, is our stock price. You know, when I joined the company, our stock price was at $13. It fell as low as $2.85 before we got it turned around. It was a bit of a crisis. Today it's right about $60. This is the measure of Wall Street. This is the measure of credibility for financial investors, and so I share it in that vein. It's evidence that servant leadership performs, that our stock has gone up by 5 times in this last 7 years. Our investors have been satisfied, in fact thrilled by the financial performance of the company, and it wouldn't have happened had we not chosen to dare to serve.
So that's a really good example of the way that you have to continue to insist on the performance results.
Absolutely.
So Cheryl, Dare to Serve goes much deeper into methods you employed and your results and lessons learned along the way. Do you want to share a few summary thoughts with us before we jump into some of the questions that have been coming from the audience?
Well, I guess my summary thought, is to reiterate these 3 points and remind you that leadership is a constant process. That daring destination we declared the first day, we had to declare that destination a lot of days before it happened. We had to really own it, believe in it, inspire people to do it. It was a constant part of our process to be brave and daring and chase that bold destination for Popeyes. The second thing we had to do is we had to constantly remind ourselves to serve. We had many days where our franchisees said, that didn't serve me well, or you didn't ask me for my opinion, or you're not listening to me. And we had to be reminded to regroup and serve our franchisees. I've done many, many reset meetings with our franchise leaders where we got off track and weren't serving them well. Part of serving our franchisees well is staying in alignment with them, which means you have to be together, agree on what the problems are, and agree on how to solve them together. So constantly checking on that attribute of listening and learning continuously. And then third, stay paranoid. Our results focus is also not once a year, it's every day. And we say in our business you have to stay paranoid every day. There's competitors today trying to eat our lunch, literally. And so I think in leadership it's hard to stay focused and motivated and inspired to do these things. And so I just want to encourage you that it's a daily battle to be bold. It's a daily battle to be humble. It's a daily battle to track and perform your results. But it's worthy. It's a worthy battle if you want to create an organization that serves people well and outperforms the rest.
Wow, that's amazing. So, Cheryl, I want to ask you one more question before we move on. There have been a lot of questions coming in the panel, and I'm anxious to make sure we address those. But, Cheryl, you've been successful in a very highly competitive industry. So I'm curious about why you chose to share your experiences through the process and all the development that you did with Dare to Serve.
Well, Becky, I never planned on being a book author. That was never in my life plan. But it became important to me for this reason. I've studied leadership my whole life. I read every leadership book that's printed, and I was a big fan of Jim Collins, who wrote Good to Great, a big fan of Stephen Covey, the father who wrote The 7 Habits, and then a fan of his son who wrote Speed of Trust. And I'm a leadership junkie. But what I found is all those theories in the books that I read were not being executed in the real world where I worked. And I wanted to actually be just one example, and we are just one company, but hopefully we can start a trend. I wanted to tell the Popeyes story as this is what practitioners are doing. These are real people in their daily workplace putting these ideas to work. And provide some evidence from the real world that they could work. And the last time a practitioner wrote a book about servant leadership was about 30 years ago. Mr. Dupree, Max Dupree at Herman Miller, the furniture company, wrote a great book, Leadership is an Art. Robert Greenleaf published a lot about servant leadership, and that was in the 70s. And there just hasn't been many practitioner books written since. So I'm not a writer, and this may be the only book I write, who knows, but I wanted to just be one example to give leaders encouragement that this is real stuff that you can apply in your organization.
Well, I think that that's one of the reasons why when I first got my hands on the book many months ago, why I devoured it, because this real life story is absolutely tremendous and compelling, and to actually hear the results in real life and how they're lived out is tremendous. So I want to add my voice to one thanking you for taking the time to share the book with the world.
Well, Becky, that's the probably the personal reason that I did it. Is this last quote is from a favorite leadership book of mine by Albert Mohler. It's called The Conviction to Lead. And he talks about leadership development and the responsibility a leader has to develop future leaders. And as you can tell, I'm getting older and I'm getting more passionate about what leaders are we leaving behind us. He says leaders are made by other leaders who go on yet to make more leaders. I want to be in that group of people that are developing future leaders, and I hope in some small way through this webinar, through my speaking engagements, and through the book that I can be an encourager to future leaders and help them be more effective in their careers.
Sure. Well, so one other place that you are encouraging leaders is through your new website, CherylBachelder.com. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you hope to achieve there?
Well, technology allows us to talk to one another in ways that we couldn't even just a few years ago. And so I created, with the help of Becky's company, Weaving Influence, a website. It's CherylBachelder.com. And the purpose of this website is to have conversations with leaders like you. Each week I'll publish a blog post on that site where you can comment, ask questions, and be in this conversation about how to do this kind of leadership. I would love to support you in your journey in that way. We've also created a place for leadership stories, and I'd really love it if you would go online even this week and share a story about a leadership lesson that you've learned around these principles in the real world, because we'd like to be a place on the website where we can accumulate stories of success around servant leadership approaches. So if you would join us in that way, I would just love to have you be part of this journey.
Well, and I will send some follow-up after this event and invite folks to participate in the great work that you're doing at CherylBachelder.com. So Cheryl, we have a few minutes, and I want to share some of the questions that have been coming in while you've been speaking.
Great.
So our friend Juan said that he's still churning on this idea that the road to bold thinking is paved with naysayers, because he feels that leaders need to find ways to get naysayers involved. Can you give us some insight on how you've done that?
Well, that's a really good point. You can't ignore naysayers, or they become troublemakers, right? Or they become in the way of success. And so I think there are two things that I would tell you that we have done to bring naysayers into the conversation. The first is just the word collaboration. The way you bring people with you is to have them in the room. So never be afraid to have someone who disagrees with you in the room. Out of their conflict, you know, iron makes iron. Diamonds are created by the friction, right, up against the diamond. So conflict is a healthy part of leadership. And so we always include people in the room who disagree with us, and we allow them to express their views. And we look for data to prove either one of us right or wrong, right? We try to let the data speak, not our emotion, because until we're aligned, you know, collaboration is a process to get to alignment. When we're aligned on the bold direction, then we can execute it well. So first idea is get your naysayers in the room and collaborate. The second thought I would give you is messaging. I think leaders underestimate the importance of how they say things to others. Our words need to be clear. They need to be inspiring. We need to influence others who follow us. And if you are struggling to get people to go with you, one opportunity I would suggest is that you look at how you're telling the story. Is your story compelling? Does it inspire people to want to come on the journey? Because, you know, a lot of our flat PowerPoint presentations don't inspire anybody. So I just want to encourage you to really work at your messaging skills and then pull the naysayers into the room with you.
That's some great points, Cheryl. Thank you. So Judy is wondering, Cheryl, do you believe as a Dare to Serve leader that there's a chance of being taken advantage of by others, and what advice might you have about that?
Yeah, well, two thoughts. The first is, and I would say that as women, women worry too much about what other people think, and I include myself in that. I spent a lot of my career wondering if I was doing what other people wanted me to do. And I would tell you that can be a derailing behavior for us, is constantly worrying about what other people think. You know, do your homework, do your business case, but if you have a plausible case for your bold ideas, have more confidence about them and be less vulnerable to the naysayers and to the critics. We second guess ourselves too much, is my honest opinion. And so then the other piece of it, I guess, is, let me think about, I just forgot that thought. That fleeting thought just flew out the window.
No worries.
Tell me the second part of her question, Becky.
Just wondering about if there's a danger in being taken advantage of.
Yes, okay. Yes, some will attempt to take advantage of you. I can only talk from personal experience. I think many people have underestimated my team's leadership because of our approach. They thought it was kumbaya and campfires, and that that we would not be persistent, we would not have conviction about what we believe, we would not follow through, and we just proved them wrong by our actions. Your actions are the only retort to that, right? So I would say nothing about it and implement your plan and let your actions speak louder than your words or their words.
That's very helpful. So, and Judy says she loves that answer, so thank you. I'm curious, Cheryl, about how the whole idea of servant leadership has been institutionalized through Popeyes. That was a question that came in early on, and I think that what I read behind that question that came in from Lyle is, you know, this is an idea that was for the leaders at the top. And so how has that trickled down throughout the rest of the organization, or how do you see others implementing the ideas of servant leadership?
Yeah, no, it wouldn't be working if it was just 8 leaders at the top that had decided to serve. We have a process in our company where we onboard new leaders and where we train existing leaders in what servant leadership is, what it looks like. And we actually ask people to go on a journey to personal purpose. Now, that sounds kind of funny, so let me explain what I mean by that. We have found that we can't make people do Popeye's purpose. They would actually have to want to do it. And no amount of preaching about the plaque makes people want to do it. It has to come through their own self-exploratory. So in Journey to Personal Purpose, every employee in our company has gone through looking at their strengths as a leader, looking at their life experiences at work, and looking at their values, and coming to terms with how they want to serve Popeyes. We have found this is the only path to getting people bought into servant leadership and committed to executing it in their actions. Now, I will tell you, not everybody in our company has become a servant leader. It's gradually taking hold. But there are far more servant leaders today than there were 7 years ago, and I would say the majority of our leaders today are servant leaders. But they got there on their own terms by coming to grips with what is it, what does it mean, how do I want to behave. You have to behave this way, right? Not just talk about it, what my actions will say. And then we hold people accountable in our performance reviews. You are reviewed on 3 things. You're reviewed on your objectives, which everybody's used to, right, your goals. You're reviewed on your competencies, right, the skills required for your job. And you're reviewed on the principles of Popeyes and whether your actions line up with our principles. That allows for multiple conversations. We talk to our team members at least twice a year and hopefully more like 4 or 5 times a year about how things are going. And we give them feedback on how their actions line up with our purpose and principles.
That's very helpful. So, Cheryl, Lori is saying that she can see how your philosophy could be applied to all areas of life, not just business, but also personal. Would that make it easier to implement the process?
Well, I personally believe she's absolutely right. I don't know how to have relationships with just the work person, right? Is anybody just a work person? You know, I've been married 34 years. I have 3 children. My mother lives with me. I have health issues. I have all the stuff in life everybody else has, right? And so I think we have to deal with each other at work as if we are whole people. And I think when we do, we're demonstrating respect and dignity towards others, that they are in fact more than just a worker. They are a whole person. And so one of the things I found fun about this journey to personal purpose is that when people explore their purpose for work, they often tell you a lot about their whole life. They tell you what experiences shaped them. They often tell you about a father or a mentor or someone at work who invested in them. They often tell you when you're talking about their values, they tell you where their values came from. Sometimes they come from tough life experiences. Sometimes they come from blessings. But if you get to know your people as whole people, there's a far better chance that you can develop them well and that they can contribute their best. I often say I must know you to grow you, and I mean your whole person.
Sure, and it's probably easier to love people when you know them more, also
Yes, it
going
is.
back to that other mention earlier in the hour. Yeah, that's very helpful, Cheryl. I think I can get to maybe 1 or 2 more questions. I do have a question and a comment here from Yolanda, Cheryl. She says that she's seen that when you're coaching and leading with compassion, you see servant leaders step up. What are your thoughts on that, Cheryl?
Well, I think this is one of the keys. If you're a high achiever, a person all about performance results, then servant leadership, this idea that you would serve others well, is a strategy for performance. And I say it that way specifically. If you know your people well, you are in the best position to put them in the right job. You're in the best position to coach them well. You're in the best position for them to be motivated to give you their best performance. This is all about creating the workplace environment for people to do their very best work. And so if you're skeptical of servant leadership, come in by way of achievement and performance. Come into it by saying, you know what, if I know you better, I can better apply you towards our priorities at work. If I know you better, I can coach you better and advance your capability. If I know you better, I'll have a hunch about what's wrong when I meet with you and see that things are not going well. I'll be in a better position to help. Think of it as a path to getting to those performance results.
Sure, that's very helpful. And that reminds me that you mentioned several times on this webinar, Cheryl, the journey to personal purpose. And this is a great chance to plug that because it is available for free on CherylBachelder.com. Can you tell folks what they might get when they download that resource from your website?
Absolutely. I talk about this journey to personal purpose in the book, so you can get the headlines from it there. And then if you go to my website, you can click on the resources section. And the whole exercise of journey to personal purpose sits there for you to use to contemplate your strengths, your values, and your life experiences and start to shape this idea of your personal purpose for work. What I can guarantee you, this is my your money back guaranteed. It's actually free, but if you go through this process to determine why you work, it will change forever the way you go to work. I'll just give you this one example. My personal purpose is to inspire purpose-driven leaders who exhibit competence and character in all aspects of their life. Well, you've already listened to me talk. I love developing leaders, right? It's about their whole life, not just their work. There's nothing more fun in my worldview than unlocking people's potential. So I come to work. I'm really proud of our fried chicken, but I come to work to develop leaders. That's what really gets me here and gets me to be excited. When you discover what that is for you, your purpose will not be the same as my purpose. But when you discover your wiring and why you want to come to work excited tomorrow morning, you will show up in an entirely different way. People will walk up to you and say, something has changed in you. I can see it, but I don't know what it is. Why are you different? Well, and it is because you're engaged. My most engaged employee I've ever met is my hairdresser, and I tell the story of Chris Wallace in the book as well, but the headline on it in the short time we have is Chris Wallace my hairdresser, is the best booked hairdresser in Atlanta, and it's because he believes he changes women's lives by giving them more confidence when they come to his chair at Van Michael's Hair Salon in Atlanta. He is a changed leader because he knows why he comes to work, and you can be too.
Wow, Cheryl. Well, that's a great way to wrap up the hour. It has been such a treat to spend this hour with you and learn from you. And I know that everyone on the call as well has been thrilled by the opportunity to hear this firsthand. I want to encourage everyone on the call, if you haven't already, pick up a copy of Cheryl's new book today. It's available on Amazon and all your favorite online booksellers. And you can also find out more and see some of the wonderful graphics that Cheryl shared with us on today's webinar at daretoserveleaders.com. Cheryl, thank you so much for investing in this hour with us.
Becky, I remembered just one thing we forgot to mention. In 2 weeks, we'll be putting on the website small group discussion guides, 8 weeks of questions and videos that you can use to discuss these things with your coworkers or your colleagues from other companies. And I just encourage you in a couple weeks to check back for those materials. Becky, thank you for leading us through a great discussion.
My pleasure. Have a great day, everyone.